Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a medieval knight chosen by a sacred quirk. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The morning sun of the realm of Yue was a painter of harsh truths. It did not discriminate, casting its golden light on the soaring alabaster towers of the Yue knightly order in the capital just as it did on the mud-caked cobblestones of the humble market town of Muzurifu. For Izuku Midoriya, it mostly illuminated the endless task of polishing another man's glory. He worked the whetstone with a practiced, rhythmic scrape, his thin shoulders hunched over the heavy broadsword. The steel sang a low, mournful song under his ministrations. This was Sir Gideon's sword, a serviceable but unremarkable blade for a serviceable but unremarkable knight. Izuku knew its every nick and imperfection, the way the fuller was slightly off-center, the way the pommel had been dented in a skirmish with goblin raiders 2 seasons ago. He knew it better than Sir Gideon did. "More elbow grease, boy!" The knight grunted from his seat by the stable doors. He was a thick-set man, his prime long past, his once fine chainmail now looking more like a fisherman's net with its missing links. His quirk, ironhide, which allowed him to harden his skin to the consistency of boiled leather, had saved his life a dozen times but had done nothing to prevent the slow decay of ambition. "A knight's blade is the extension of his soul. Mine feels a bit dull." "Yes, Sir Gideon," Izuku replied, his voice soft, almost lost in the morning bustle of the courtyard. He didn't point out that a knight's soul was not, in fact, stored in his sword, nor that Sir Gideon's soul probably felt dull because he spent most of his days complaining about the price of ale. Izuku simply pressed harder, his knuckles white. This was his life. Squire to a hedge knight on the kingdom's periphery. At 17, he should have already been an aspirant, taking the trials for a proper order. Instead, he was quirkless. In the realm of Yue, to be born quirkless was to be born a ghost. Quirks were everything. They were the divine spark, the personal magic that determined one's fate. The baker in the town square had a minor pyrokinesis quirk, allowing him to keep his ovens at the perfect temperature. The stable master could soothe the most skittish mare with a touch, a common empathy quirk. Knights, lords, and heroes, they wielded the true power. Quirks that summoned lightning, that granted super speed, that allowed them to command the very elements. Izuku had nothing. The spark had missed him. He was a blank page in a world of vibrant, magical text. The other squires, the children in the streets, the merchants, they all saw it, or rather, they saw through him. He was just Deku. The one who can't. He finished with the sword, its edge now keen enough to shave a hair. He presented it to Sir Gideon, hilt first, with the formal bow he perfected from studying the old codices. Gideon grunted his approval, strapping the scabbard to his belt. "Right. I'm off to the barracks. There's talk of some beast troubling the southern farmlands. Probably just a pack of gnarled wolves. Still, the knight captain is getting twitchy." He clapped Izuku on the shoulder, a heavy, paternal gesture that lacked any real warmth. "Keep the armor clean. And stay out of trouble." Izuku watched him go, a pang of familiar, hopeless longing in his chest. He didn't want to just polish the armor. He wanted to wear it. He wanted to face down the gnarled wolves, to protect the farmlands, to be the one riding out to meet the danger, not the one left behind to scrub the blood off the steel afterward. His gaze drifted past the town walls, towards the distant, shimmering peak of Yue Mountain. The fortress of the knightly order was a legend made stone, a place where the greatest heroes of the age were forged. To join their ranks was the dream of every child in Yue. For Izuku, it was a dream so vast and impossible it felt like a physical ache. "Still daydreaming, Deku?" The voice was a sneer wrapped in gravel. Izuku flinched, turning to see a figure stride into the training yard, flanked by 2 other aspirants. Katsuki Bakugo. If Izuku was a ghost, Bakugo was a bonfire. He was noble-born, the son of a minor lord, but his power eclipsed his station. His quirk was explosion, a terrifyingly potent and versatile magic that allowed him to secrete a nitroglycerin-like substance from his palms and ignite it at will. He was a prodigy, a force of nature crammed into the body of a young man. His blonde hair was as sharp and aggressive as his personality, and his crimson eyes held a permanent glint of arrogant fire. Shouldn't you be washing Sir Gideon's underthings? Bakugo mocked, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. His gauntlets, specially forged with wide, open palms, smoked faintly. I finished my morning duties, Kaken. Izuku mumbled, using the childhood name that now felt like a relic from another lifetime, a time before he had understood the chasm that separated them. Kaken? Bakugo scoffed, stepping closer. The air around him seemed to crackle with latent energy. You think you still have the right to call me that, you quirkless wannabe? You're a pebble, a speck of dust. You don't even belong in a training yard. He gestured dismissively at the practice dummy nearby. Watch. This is what a real knight looks like. He turned, his posture shifting into a perfect battle stance. There was no denying his talent. His form was flawless, honed by years of expensive tutelage and relentless practice. He crouched low, his left hand braced forward, his right pulled back. AP shot! He roared. Instead of a wide, concussive blast, a focused beam of explosive energy shot from his palm, striking the straw-stuffed dummy dead center. The dummy didn't just fall over, it vaporized. Straw, wood, and canvas disintegrated in a flash of blinding light and a deafening crack that echoed through the courtyard. The air smelled of ozone and burnt sugar. The other aspirants whistled in awe. Townspeople who had been milling about stopped to stare, their faces a mixture of fear and admiration. This was power. This was the future. Bakugo turned back to Izuku, his smirk widening into a triumphant snarl. See that, Deku? That's the kind of power that gets you into UA. That's the power that makes you a hero. What have you got? A rag and a whetstone? Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His nails dug into his palms. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Bakugo was right. In this world, might made right, and Izuku was utterly, pathetically bereft of might. He could feel the stares of the onlookers, the pity, the contempt. He dropped his gaze to the dusty ground, wishing it would swallow him whole. Get out of my sight! Bakugo spat, shouldering past him with enough force to make Izuku stumble. You're polluting the air. Izuku watched them go, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. The humiliation was a physical burn, hotter than the lingering heat from Bakugo's blast. He gathered his polishing cloths and the whetstone, his movements stiff and jerky, and retreated from the yard, unable to bear the lingering stares any longer. Later that afternoon, when the sun was high and the world was busy, Izuku slipped away. He took a path behind the stables, one that wound through a thicket of gorse and bramble before opening into a small, forgotten clearing. This was his sanctuary, a place where there were no mocking eyes, no impossible standards. In the center of the clearing was a single, weather-beaten wooden post, scarred with countless cuts. Leaning against an ancient oak tree was his own sword. It wasn't a knight's blade. It was a cast-off, a rusted piece of scrap he'd found in Sir Gideon's junk pile. He'd spent weeks grinding the rust away, sharpening the pitted edge, wrapping the tang in rough leather for a grip. It was too heavy, poorly balanced, and ugly. It was his. He took a deep breath, trying to push Bakugo's words from his mind. He lifted the clumsy sword, the weight of it a familiar strain on his underdeveloped arms. He fell into a stance, not the brawling posture of a hedge knight, but the precise, elegant form of the UA high guard he'd studied in books. His feet were perfectly placed, his shoulders square, his eyes focused on an imaginary foe. He moved through the forms, his body flowing with a grace that belied his lack of strength. Parry high, riposte low. Lunge, withdraw. Sidestep, thrust. He was a scholar of the blade, if not a master. He knew the theory better than any squire in the town, perhaps better than most knights. But theory was weightless. The sword was not. After a few minutes, his arms burned and his breath came in ragged gasps. The tip of the heavy blade wavered. Frustrated, he let out a cry and swung with all his might at the post. The sword connected with a dull thud, biting only an inch into the wood before his arms gave out, the impact jarring him to the bone. He stumbled back, panting, sweat stinging his eyes. Useless. Deku. He sank to the ground, his back against the oak tree, and pulled a small, leather-bound journal from his tunic. This was his true weapon. His true quirk, if he'd had one. He flipped it open. The pages were crammed with his small, neat handwriting and detailed sketches. It was his hero analysis for the future. In it, he dissected the fighting styles, quirks, and histories of every great knight he'd ever read about. He turned to the most revered section, the pages worn thin with consultation. The heading read, Sir All Might, the symbol of peace. Underneath was a painstakingly drawn recreation of All Might in his prime, a giant of a man with a smile that could banish shadows and fists that could level mountains. His quirk was listed as unknown super strength. But Izuku knew it was more than that. It was a legend. They said his kingdom smashes could change the weather. He was the pinnacle, the unshakable pillar of justice against whom all other heroes were measured. He had defeated the great evil, the Sorcerer King all for one, in a battle that had cracked the very foundations of the land, though he had disappeared from public life shortly after. His victory absolute but costly. Izuku's fingers traced the drawing. All Might was what a hero was supposed to be. Not just powerful, but good. He saved people with a smile. He inspired hope. He made you feel safe. He flipped a few more pages. The entry was newer, the ink still crisp. Katsuki Bakugo. The drawing was dynamic, capturing the explosive energy of his rival. Below it were lines of frantic analysis. Quirk, explosion. Incredibly versatile. Can be used for propulsion, flight/high-speed dodges, offense, wide-area blasts like stun grenade or focused attacks like AP shot, and defense, using smaller explosions to deflect projectiles. Strengths, overwhelming power. Incredible reflexes and combat instincts. Aggressive style keeps opponents constantly on the defensive. Highly intelligent in battle. Weaknesses, a small list, but Izuku had thought about it for hours. Over-reliance on overwhelming force. Tends to lead with his right hand for his strongest blows, a potential tell. Arrogance. Underestimates opponents, especially those he deems weak. This could lead to him being baited into a trap. Limited in prolonged combat? His quirk relies on his sweat. In a long, drawn-out battle in a cold environment, would his power wane? Needs more data. He chewed on the end of his quill. Bakugo was a genius, but he was a predictable genius. His every move was designed to scream, I am the strongest. He never fainted, never retreated, never used subtlety when brute force was an option. A clever, patient fighter could exploit that. If that fighter had a quirk of their own to survive the initial onslaught. A wave of despair washed over him, so potent it was nauseating. What was the point of all this? Analyzing weaknesses he could never exploit? Practicing sword forms with a body that couldn't keep up. He was a scholar dreaming of being a warrior, a bird with meticulously crafted wax wings, destined to fall the moment he tried to fly. He slammed the journal shut. For a moment, he considered throwing it into the woods, along with the rusty sword and the whole stupid, impossible dream. He could be a blacksmith's apprentice. Or a scribe. He could accept his lot, find a quiet, quirkless life, and stop chasing a sun that would only ever burn him. But he couldn't, because he remembered the stories. He remembered the feeling of awe when he read about the symbol of peace saving 100 people from a collapsing citadel. He remembered the unshakable belief, deep in his gut, that being a hero wasn't just about having power. It was about what you did with it. It was about standing up for others, about rushing in when everyone else ran away. And so, he picked up the sword again. His arms screamed in protest, but he ignored them. He moved through the forms once more, his mind focused, his spirit, if not his body, unyielding. He would keep trying, even if it was hopeless. It was all he knew how to do. Dusk bled purple and orange across the sky as Izuku made his way back to the town proper. The air was cooling, carrying the scent of wood smoke from evening hearths and baking bread from the baker who was, no doubt, using his pyrokinesis for one last batch. The town was settling down for the night. It felt peaceful. Safe. He was passing the main gate when the first scream tore through the evening calm. It wasn't a human scream. It was a shriek of twisted metal and animal rage, a sound that scraped at the inside of your skull. People froze in the streets. The baker dropped his tray. The cheerful chatter of the tavern died instantly. Then came the splintering crash. A section of the town's stout wooden palisade exploded inwards, sending shrapnel and bodies flying. Through the breach stormed a nightmare. It was vaguely wolf-like, but grotesquely oversized, easily the height of a warhorse at the shoulder. Its fur was a matted, sickly gray, but parts of its body were covered in overlapping plates of black, chitinous armor. A second, smaller set of arms, ending in vicious-looking claws, sprouted from its chest. Its head was a monstrosity of exposed bone and taut muscle, with 6 glowing red eyes that darted about with a terrifying, unnatural intelligence. This was no gnarled wolf. This was a gnome, creatures of dark magic and stolen quirks. Abominations forged by the lingering will of the Sorcerer King. They were rare this far from the blighted lands, a sign of a spreading sickness in the world. Panic erupted. People screamed and ran, tripping over each other in their haste to find shelter. The town guard, brave men with simple steel and simpler quirks, tried to form a line. One guard, whose quirk let him stretch his arms, tried to ensnare the beast. The gnome swiped him aside with a flick of its primary claws, sending him crashing into a storefront. Another guard, who could generate sparks from his fingertips, managed to singe its fur. The creature didn't even seem to notice. It let out another soul-rending howl and charged deeper into the market square. Izuku was frozen, hidden in the shadow of an awning. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was real. This wasn't a story in a book. The smell of blood and fear was thick in the air. His every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to survive. Just then, a flash of orange and a deafening boom announced a new arrival. "Get the hell out of my way, you damn monster!" Katsuki Bakugo flew over the rooftops, propelled by controlled explosions from his palms, landing in the center of the square between the Nomu and a group of cowering townsfolk. He didn't look scared. He looked furious, incandescent with rage that such a creature would dare to cause chaos in his town. "I'll send you back to whatever hell you crawled out of," he snarled, dropping into his fighting stance. The Nomu's 6 eyes fixed on him, a flicker of what looked like cruel amusement in their depths. It ignored the guards, recognizing the greater threat, the brighter spark of power. "Die!" Bakugo roared, blasting forward. He was a whirlwind of violent motion, explosions erupting from his hands as he dodged and weaved around the beast's clumsy but powerful swipes. Each blast left smoking craters in the cobblestones and scorched marks on the Noma's chitinous plates. He was magnificent. He was terrifying. He was holding it back. Sir Gideon and a handful of other knights arrived, trying to flank the creature, their swords looking like toothpicks against its bulk. "Focus its attention!" Sir Gideon yelled. "Sir Bakugo, keep it occupied!" But Bakugo didn't fight as part of a team. He fought to win. "I don't need your help, you old relics!" He spat, launching himself into the air for a devastating overhead strike. Howitzer impact! He spun in the air, creating a cyclone of explosive fire that descended on the Nomu. The blast was immense, shaking the very foundations of the nearby buildings. For a moment, the beast was engulfed in a fireball, but as the smoke cleared, the creature was still standing. Its fur was charred, its armor cracked, but it was very much alive. And it had learned. While Bakugo was still in the air, recovering from his massive attack, the Nomu's chest split open, revealing a hidden, fleshy orifice. A thick, gelatinous substance shot out, not at Bakugo, but at the ground around him. It was a sticky, powerful adhesive. When Bakugo landed, his boots sank into the mire, trapping him. "What the?" he grunted, struggling to pull his feet free. The adhesive held him fast. The Nomu saw its chance. It lunged, not with its claws, but with its massive, bone-plated head. It slammed into Bakugo, who managed to get his arms up just in time. He grunted in pain as he was thrown back, but the adhesive on his boots held, and he was violently snapped back towards the beast. He was off balance, anchored, and vulnerable. The knights tried to intervene, but the Nomu was single-minded. It raised a massive clawed hand, ready to bring it down and crush the trapped, explosive prodigy. Time seemed to slow for Izuku. He saw it all with the cold, analytical clarity of his journal entries. Over-reliance on overwhelming force. Underestimates opponents. Bakugo had seen a monster, and assumed a bigger explosion was the answer. He hadn't considered it might have a second, tactical quirk. He had been baited. He was going to die, and everyone was frozen. The guards were terrified. The knights were too far away. The townsfolk were paralyzed by fear. A little girl, who had been separated from her mother, stood staring, tears streaming down her face. Bakugo, for the first time Izuku had ever seen, had a look of genuine shock and fear in his eyes. Something inside Izuku broke. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was an instinct, a primal, undeniable impulse that bypassed his fear, his logic, his self-preservation. It was the core belief he'd clung to in the dark, the one thing he knew was true about being a hero. You rush in when everyone else runs away. His legs were moving before his brain caught up. He burst from the shadows, his scrawny frame a blur of motion. The world narrowed to a tunnel. All he could see was the terrified face of his rival, the falling claw, the little girl who was about to watch someone die. He wasn't a knight. He didn't have a quirk. He didn't even have his rusty sword. But there, leaning against a market stall, was a fallen guard's shield. A round, steel-banded shield, heavy and solid. Without breaking stride, he snatched it up. The weight was immense, a shock to his system. It felt like he was trying to lift a boulder. But adrenaline, or something deeper, something purer, flooded his veins. He didn't have a plan. He wasn't trying to fight. He was just trying to help. "Leave him alone!" he screamed, his voice cracking, raw with a terror and fury he didn't know he possessed. He ran directly at the multi-ton behemoth, planting his feet and heaving the shield up in front of him. It was a suicidal, insane, and utterly useless gesture. A pebble throwing itself at a mountain, a moth flying into a furnace. The gnome's 6 red eyes swiveled from the trapped Bakugo to the source of this new, insignificant noise. It saw the quirkless squire, the boy with the terrified eyes and the impossible resolve, charging forward to meet his certain doom. For a split second, the world held its breath, poised on the edge of a blade. The monster's claw descended. Izuku braced for impact. And in that moment, the fate of the quirkless squire was sealed, not by an ending, but by a beginning. Time dissolved into a thick, syrupy dread. For Izuku Midoriya, the universe had contracted to the space of a single, final heartbeat. He saw the descending claw of the Nomu, a crescent of blackened bone and chitin large enough to be a farmer's scythe. He saw the glint of its 6 malevolent eyes, devoid of anything but predatory hunger. He felt the wind of its passage, a foul gust that smelled of grave dirt and ozone. His arms, screaming with the impossible weight of the shield, trembled on the verge of collapse. His mind, a frantic swirl of terror, offered up a single, starkly clear thought: this is it. This is how it ends. He had accomplished nothing. He hadn't saved Bakugo. He hadn't even made the monster flinch. He was just a momentary, suicidal distraction. A fool's final, futile gesture. He squeezed his eyes shut, a pathetic whimper catching in his throat. Thwack! The sound was not the wet, crunching impact of his own demise. It was sharp, solid, like an axe splitting a log. It was followed by a guttural shriek of genuine pain from the Nomu, the first it had uttered. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The claw, which should have pulped him, had been violently knocked askew. It had slammed into the cobblestones beside him, shattering them and sending a spiderweb of cracks through the street. The Nomu stumbled, shaking its massive head, its limb twitching. Standing between him and the beast, where a moment before there had been only empty air, was a man. He was a scarecrow, a walking skeleton draped in the loose, worn clothes of a common traveler. His frame was so gaunt it looked as though a strong wind might snap him in two. His cheeks were hollowed, casting his face in deep shadow, and his blonde hair hung in limp, defeated strands around his skull. He looked frail, sick, and utterly out of place. Yet he stood with the unshakable stillness of a mountain. His posture was one of absolute calm, his eyes, sunk deep in their sockets but blazing with an impossible blue intensity, were fixed on the monster. He held no weapon. Now, the man said, his voice a surprisingly steady baritone, though it held a wheezing, breathy quality. That's no way to treat a boy with more courage than sense. The Nomu, enraged, swiped at him with its other clawed hand. The movement was a blur of lethal speed. The skeletal man didn't retreat. He shifted his weight, a subtle, economical movement, and his hand shot out. It was not a block. He struck the inside of the Nomu's wrist with the heel of his palm. A sharp crack echoed in the stunned silence. The beast's wrist bent at an unnatural angle, and it howled again, pulling the injured limb back. It was impossible. The raw, physical power required for such a feat was unthinkable from a man who looked on the verge of collapsing from a cough. The crowd, which had been frozen in terror, began to murmur. Bakugo, still struggling against the adhesive, stared with wide, disbelieving eyes. Who the hell, a clever beast? The gaunt man mused aloud, his eyes tracking the Nomu's movements with the cool appraisal of a master huntsman. 2 quirks, shock absorption through its chitinous plating, and a secondary adhesive compound for trapping. But its core is unstable. A rush job. The Nomu, driven by a fury that overrode its pain, opened the orifice in its chest again, preparing another volley of the sticky trap. Don't let it! A voice shouted. It was Izuku. His mind, jolted from its stupor, had clicked back into its familiar, analytical rhythm. He had seen it. The man was right. The creature was powerful but flawed. The orifice! It's unprotected when it fires! Izuku yelled, pointing a trembling finger. It's a weak point! The gaunt man's lips quirked into the faintest of smiles. He didn't look at Izuku, but the boy felt a sense of acknowledgement, of being seen, that was more potent than any praise he'd ever received. Well spotted, my boy, the man said. As the Nomu prepared to spew its glue, the man moved. He wasn't just fast, he seemed to bend space around him. In one instant he was 10 feet away, the next he was right in front of the beast, his fist drawn back. For a fraction of a second, something extraordinary happened. The man's right arm, from the shoulder down, seemed to swell. The loose fabric of his sleeve strained as muscle and sinew exploded into being, dense and powerful. It was a flicker of impossible might, a ghost of unimaginable strength inhabiting a frail shell. Kingdom Punch! He bellowed, and his voice was no longer thin and wheezing. It was a roar that shook the very air, a sound of absolute authority. His fist, now the size of a small boulder, slammed into the Nomu's chest, directly into the vulnerable, open orifice. The impact didn't just break bone, it created a shockwave. A concussive blast of pure force erupted from the point of contact, traveling through the creature's entire body. The Nomu's 6 eyes went wide with shock, and a wave of internal ruptures visibly pulsed beneath its skin. It was thrown backward, its massive body flying through the air as if it were a child's toy. It crashed through the wall of the tavern it had just been menacing and lay still amidst the splintered wood and broken barrels, a wisp of dark smoke curling from its chest before dissipating into nothing. Silence descended. A profound, absolute silence filled with utter disbelief. The man stood over the fallen beast, his arm already shrinking back to its skeletal proportions. He swayed on his feet, and a violent, racking cough seized him. He brought a hand to his mouth, and when he pulled it away, Izuku saw the dark stain of blood on his palm. The townsfolk began to stir, a wave of relieved, hysterical chatter rising up. Knights rushed forward, their swords held ready, but they stopped short, staring at the gaunt stranger with awe and confusion. Bakugo had finally managed to use a series of small, precise explosions to burn away the adhesive around his boots. He stood up, his face a mask of fury, humiliation, and bewilderment. He looked at the defeated Nomu, then at the skeletal man, then at Izuku, who was still on his knees clutching the heavy shield. His crimson eyes narrowed, unable to process what had just happened. The gaunt man, seeing the attention turning to him, did not wait for thanks or questions. He gave a weak, dismissive wave and with a shuffling gait that belied the godlike power he had just displayed, slipped into the deepening twilight of an alleyway and vanished. The moment he was gone, the spell was broken. People surged forward, surrounding Bakugo, hailing him as a hero for his initial stand. Sir Gideon clapped him on the shoulder, praising his bravery. No one looked at Izuku. He was forgotten again, a footnote in a story that wasn't his. He let the shield fall from his numb fingers. It clanged loudly on the cobblestones, the sound of his own insignificance. He pushed himself to his feet and, feeling more invisible than ever, limped away from the light and the noise, seeking the solace of his own private darkness. The small clearing was just as he'd left it. The scarred wooden post stood like a silent witness, and his rusty practice sword leaned against the oak tree, a monument to his foolish dreams. The moon, a perfect silver disk, filtered through the canopy, dappling the ground in ethereal light. Izuku sat with his back against the tree, his whole body an aching symphony of pain. His muscles screamed from the strain of lifting the shield. His head throbbed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the churning chaos in his soul. He had faced death. He had run toward it. Why? His mind kept replaying the moment. Bakugo's trapped form, the little girl's terrified face, the certainty that if he did nothing, something terrible would happen. It hadn't been a choice. It had been a reflex, as involuntary as breathing. A stupid, suicidal reflex. And then there was the man. The skeletal stranger with the power of a god. That flicker of strength, the voice that commanded the very air, it was familiar. It tickled at the edges of his memory, a half-remembered legend. He pulled his journal from his tunic, his fingers fumbling with the clasp. He didn't know what he was looking for. A clue. An answer. Anything to make sense of the madness. That was a reckless thing you did, boy. The voice came from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. Izuku yelped, scrambling back, his heart leaping into his throat. The gaunt stranger stepped into the moonlight. He looked even more frail now, his breathing shallow and labored. Who are you? Izuku stammered, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his practiced sword. The man took another step, then leaned against a tree for support. Just a traveler. One who happened to be passing through. His blue eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to pierce right through Izuku. I've been watching you for some time, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku froze. You know my name? I know a great deal, the man said, his voice soft. I know you are squire to Sir Gideon. I know you spend your afternoons here, training with a sword your arms can barely lift, and I know, he added, his gaze flicking to the journal in Izuku's lap, that you dream of being a hero more than anyone else in this realm. A cold knot of fear and confusion tightened in Izuku's stomach. Are you a sorcerer? Did you come here with that thing? The man let out a dry, rasping chuckle that turned into another painful-sounding cough. No, my boy. I am the furthest thing from that creature's master. In fact, you could say I am his sworn enemy. He pushed himself off the tree and took a slow, deliberate step forward. You asked me who I am? But I think you already know, don't you? In your heart, Izuku's mind raced. The impossible strength. The booming voice. The way he just appeared when hope was lost. The sheer, overwhelming presence that radiated from his broken frame. It all clicked into place, a puzzle so fantastic, so utterly absurd, that his brain refused to accept it. But his heart, the part of him that lived in the world of legends and heroes, knew. It can't be, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. He disappeared years ago. They say he was bigger, stronger. The man sighed, a long, weary sound, like the settling of old stones. A battle against a true and terrible evil takes its toll. He stood in the center of the clearing, bathed in the silver light. Looks can be deceiving, and then he drew in a deep, shuddering breath. Steam began to pour from his body, hissing into the cool night air. His skeletal frame began to expand, to swell with a terrifying speed. Bones thickened, muscles erupted, his clothes straining at the seams. His gaunt face filled out, the hollows vanishing, replaced by a chiseled jaw and a heroic visage. His limp hair shot upwards, defying gravity to form two iconic, golden tufts, like the antennae of some magnificent insect. In the space of 5 seconds, the dying scarecrow was gone. In his place stood a colossus. A giant of a man, well over 7 feet tall, with a barrel chest and arms as thick as tree trunks. He was the man from the statues, the hero from the codices, the legend made flesh. On his face was a smile that could banish any shadow, a beacon of pure, unadulterated hope. He was Sir All-Might. Izuku's journal slipped from his nerveless fingers. His jaw hung open. His mind simply stopped. He stared, his eyes wide, his brain short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the impossible reality before him. Words tumbled out of his mouth in a frantic, nonsensical stream. No, wait! What? How? But the books, the wound, you retired, but you're here, you're so much bigger in person. Oh my gods, it's really you, All Might. All Might's booming, confident laughter filled the clearing. So it is. I apologize for the dramatic flair, young man. It's been a while since I've had to do the whole reveal. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the illusion shattered. More steam hissed from his body, and with a pained groan, the giant hero deflated. The muscles receded, the smile vanished, and the bones seemed to shrink. In moments he was once again the gaunt, skeletal Tashinori Yagi, who promptly doubled over, coughing violently and spitting a glob of blood onto the grass. See? He wheezed, wiping his mouth. Not quite the picture of health you see in the storybooks. Izuku could only stare, his mind reeling. But, your power, the Nomu! Tashinori straightened up, his expression turning grim. He slowly, painfully, lifted his tunic. Izuku gasped. Covering the entire left side of the man's torso was a scar unlike anything Izuku had ever seen. It was a horrifying, puckered vortex of ruined flesh, a crater of twisted tissue centered just below his ribs. It wasn't just a wound, it was a blight. The skin was discolored, a sickly purple-black, and faint, dark tendrils of energy seemed to ride just beneath the surface, as if the injury itself were alive and malevolent. 5 years ago, Tashinori said, his voice low and heavy with memory. My final battle with the Sorcerer King. You've read of it, I'm sure. The official histories say I defeated him and walked away unscathed. The truth. He gestured to the horrific wound. Is that he did this to me. A cursed quirk, designed to devour its victim from the inside out. It destroyed my stomach and one of my lungs. The court mages and healers did what they could, but the dark magic holds. They saved my life, but they couldn't save my power. He let the tunic fall. The hero known as All Might can only truly exist for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, I am this. He gestured to his own emaciated form. Every time I flex my muscles, every time I use my quirk, it's like straining a leaky wineskin. The power drains away, and my time limit gets shorter. The punch I used on that Nomu? It probably cost me 10 minutes of my remaining time. The revelation hit Izuku like a physical blow. The symbol of peace was broken. The unshakable pillar of justice was crumbling. The world didn't know it, but its greatest protector was a dying man. Then, why? Izuku whispered. Why were you here? Why did you save me? Tashinori's piercing blue eyes met his. Because you, young man, did something no one else did. The knights, the guards, they all have quirks. They are trained for battle. They acted because it was their duty. The boy Bakugo acted out of pride and a desire to prove his strength. But you, he took a step closer, his gaze intense. You, a quirkless squire with no power, no training to speak of, and no hope of winning, you were the first one to move. You ran into mortal danger not for glory, not for duty, but because you saw someone in trouble and your body moved on its own. In that moment, amidst all the powerful quirks and polished steel, you were the most heroic person in that square. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, hot and sudden. He tried to speak, to deny it, to call himself a fool, but the words wouldn't come. There are stories, legends of quirks that are not simply inherited by blood. All Might continued, his voice taking on a solemn, reverent tone. They are called sacred quirks. They are trusts, legacies. My power is one of these. It is called One for All. The name hung in the air, filled with a mythic weight. It is a sacred torch, passed from one champion to the next through generations. It is the crystallization of valor, a quirk that cultivates and stockpiles power, growing stronger with each wielder who nourishes it with their own spirit. It was born to stand against its dark twin, a vile quirk that steals power, the quirk of the Sorcerer King, all for one. He looked at Izuku, and the boy saw in his eyes the weight of ages, the burden of a long and secret war. I have been searching for a successor. Someone worthy of inheriting this power and this burden. I have looked at knights and nobles, prodigies and geniuses. But they all lack something, the fundamental, instinctual need to save others above all else. All Might's expression softened. Then I saw you. A boy with the heart of a true hero, trapped in a body with no power. And I knew. He took a final step, standing directly in front of the kneeling, trembling boy. He placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. Young man, he said, his voice resonating with a power that had nothing to do with muscles or magic, but with pure, unshakable conviction. You, too, can be a hero. That was it. The dam broke. A strangled sob escaped Izuku's lips. The words he had longed to hear his entire life, the validation he had been denied by everyone, his peers, his teachers, the world itself, were finally spoken by the one person who mattered most. The tears came then, a flood of them, washing away years of humiliation, of despair, of hopeless longing. He wept, his shoulders shaking, his face buried in his hands, ugly, gasping sobs of profound, earth-shattering relief. All his life, he was Deku, the useless one. All his life, he had been told he was less, that his dream was a joke. And now, the greatest hero the world had ever known was looking at him and seeing not a quirkless failure, but a worthy successor. All Might waited patiently for the storm to subside. When Izuku finally looked up, his face tear-streaked and blotchy but his eyes shining with a new, fierce light, the hero's expression was serious. This is not a gift I offer you, my boy. It is a terrible burden. If you accept this power, you accept my fight. The remnants of All for One's evil are stirring. That Nomu was proof. His apprentice, a young man named Tamura Shigaraki, gathers followers in the shadows. If you take One for All, you will paint a target on your back for the rest of your life. It will be a path of pain, sacrifice, and danger. You must understand this. Izuku looked at the hero's ruined torso, at the pain in his eyes, at the memory of the Nomu's claw. He felt the fear, cold and sharp. But then he remembered the feeling of running forward, the scream of defiance torn from his throat. He thought of the little girl, safe now with her mother. He thought of a world without a symbol of peace to protect it. He pushed himself to his feet, wiping his tears with the back of his dirty hand. He stood as tall as his scrawny frame would allow and looked the living legend in the eye. His voice was hoarse, but it did not waver. If I can use that power to help people, he said, his resolve hardening with every word. If I can save even one person from feeling the terror I felt today. If I can bring hope to people, the way you do, then it's a burden I will gladly carry. A genuine, brilliant smile spread across Toshinori's face. It was not the grand, public smile of All Might, but a smaller, warmer, and infinitely more precious one. It was the smile of a proud mentor. Well said, he breathed. Then it is decided. He reached up and, with a thoughtful expression, plucked one of the two iconic, golden strands of hair from his head. It seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, a filament of pure potential. He held it out to Izuku. The transfer requires you to ingest a piece of my DNA. All Might explained, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. It's a bit strange, I admit. But it is how the torch is passed. So, he offered the single strand of hair to the dumbfounded boy. Eat this. Izuku stared at the hair. He stared at All Might's earnest face. He stared back at the hair. Of all the magical, mythical, life-altering things that had happened in the last hour, this was somehow the most bizarre. He was being offered the power of a god, the legacy of heroes, and the price of admission was eating a hair. Slowly, his hand reached out. His fingers, still trembling slightly, closed around the single strand. It felt surprisingly solid, warm to the touch, and seemed to hum with a faint, latent energy. He looked at All Might one last time, who gave him an encouraging nod. Izuku took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and put the hair in his mouth. He swallowed. For a moment, nothing happened. He felt no surge of power, no bolt of lightning. Then, a slow, deep warmth began to spread from the pit of his stomach. It was not a fire, but an ember, a tiny, sleeping seed of immense power, now planted within him. It was a promise. A potential, coiled and waiting. He felt it settle deep inside his soul, a quiet, humming presence that was both foreign and profoundly right. It will take time for your body to acclimate, Toshinori said, his voice gentle. And you cannot use the power yet. Your body as it is now would be a poor vessel. If you tried to access even a fraction of One for All, your limbs would blow apart. Our work is just beginning. He clapped Izuku on the shoulder again, and this time, the touch felt different. It was no longer just a hero and a fanboy. It was a master and an apprentice. a legacy and its future. Go home and rest, my boy. Your life has changed forever. Your journey to becoming a true knight, and the next symbol of peace, starts tomorrow at dawn. Izuku could only nod, his mind too full for words. He watched as Tashinori Yagi, the frail man carrying the soul of a giant, turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving Izuku alone in the moonlit clearing. He was still Izuku Midoriya. He was still quirkless to the eyes of the world. But now, for the first time in his life, he was no longer empty. He was filled with a terrifying, wondrous, and sacred hope. He looked up at the moon, then down at his own trembling hands. They were the same hands that polished another man's sword, the same hands that were too weak to swing his own. But now, they held the potential to move mountains. The sun was setting on the age of All Might, but here, in the heart of a quirkless squire, a new dawn was about to break. Dawn arrived not with a gentle blush, but with a stark, gray finality. Izuku awoke, with a gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs. The memory of the previous night flooded his senses. The Nomu's terrifying screech, the impossible transformation of the skeletal traveler, the weight of a hero's hair on his tongue. It had to be a dream, a vivid, desperate fantasy cooked up by a mind starved for hope. He was still just Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless squire. Deku. But then he felt it. Deep within his core, nestled somewhere between his stomach and his soul, was a warmth. It was not the familiar heat of blood or breath. This was a foreign energy, a sleeping titan coiled in the very center of his being. It was a silent, humming pressure, like an infinite ocean held back by the most fragile of dams. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. It was real. One for all was inside him. He dressed in a daze, his hands fumbling with the laces of his worn leather tunic. He bypassed his usual morning duties. Sir Gideon's armor could wait. All Might had given him a new purpose, a new master to serve. He crept out of the barracks as the town was beginning to stir, his rusty practice sword in hand, and made his way to the meeting point All Might had designated, the scrapyard of the fallen, a desolate patch of land just beyond the southern walls. It was a graveyard of ambition and failure. Here lay the rusted carcasses of broken siege engines from forgotten border skirmishes, piles of dented and pierced armor deemed unfit for repair, and splintered lances that had met their end against beast or shield wall. The air was thick with the metallic tang of decay and the sad scent of rust. It was a fitting place to begin, a testament to the fact that even the strongest steel could break. All Might was already there, in his gaunt form as Tashinori Yagi. He stood silhouetted against the rising sun, looking over the fields of refuse with a thoughtful expression. He turned as Izuku approached, a faint smile touching his lips. "Ah, young Midoriya. You came, of course, All Might," Izuku said, his voice cracking with a mixture of awe and nervousness. He bowed deeply. I couldn't miss it." "Good," Tashinori said, his tone all business now. "Then our work begins. The first step is the hardest. You must learn to touch the power you now hold. One for all is a raging sea. For now, all I want you to do is draw forth a single drop." He gestured to a particularly large and sturdy-looking pile of scrap metal, the remains of an old catapult's counterweight, a solid block of iron the size of a hay bale. "Channel the power into your sword arm, just a sliver. And strike that." Izuku's heart hammered. This was it. The first time he would wield the power of heroes. He looked down at his own arm, thin and pale in the morning light. It seemed so inadequate, so fragile. He then looked at the rusty, pitted blade in his hand. It was his only sword, a symbol of his desperate, lonely efforts. He wanted this first swing to be with his own blade. "Okay," he whispered, more to himself than to All Might. He took his position, feet planted firmly in the dirt. He closed his eyes, turning his focus inward. He reached for the warmth, the sleeping titan in his core. He pictured the raging sea All Might had described and tried to imagine dipping a single finger into it. He felt the response. The warmth stirred, unfurling like a waking dragon. It was more than warmth now. It was a current, a river of raw energy. It flowed from his center, up through his chest, and into his shoulder. He felt his muscles tense, his veins throb. Greenish gold light, like captive lightning, began to crackle around his arm, tracing patterns on his skin. The air grew heavy, humming with an audible thrum of power. "Easy, my boy." All Might's voice was a low warning. Just a drop, but it was too late. Izuku had touched the ocean, and now the tidal wave was coming. The power surged, no longer a river but a cataclysm. It was far more than he had called for, a torrent of unrestrained force that overwhelmed him instantly. He felt a sensation like his very bones were glowing white-hot, about to turn to glass. He cried out, a sound that was half effort and half agony, and swung the sword. The world exploded in a symphony of destruction. The first casualty was the sword. The moment the untamed power of One for All surged into the cheap, rusted steel, the blade couldn't handle the vibration. It didn't just break, it atomized. The metal screamed, glowing cherry red for a microsecond before vaporizing into a cloud of glittering dust and superheated shrapnel. The second casualty was his arm. The power, having lost its conduit, erupted from his limb. A wet, sickening crack echoed across the scrapyard, a sound of splintering bone and tearing sinew. A spiral fracture bloomed along his radius and ulna, while the explosive force dislocated his shoulder and elbow simultaneously. Pain, blinding and absolute, erupted behind his eyes. It was a white-hot nova that erased all thought, all feeling, all sense of self. He didn't even see what happened to the catapult weight. He was thrown backward by the recoil of his own power, tumbling through the air like a ragdoll before crashing heavily into a pile of discarded shields. His head connected with the dented boss, and the world went dark. Izuku awoke to the gentle pressure of something cool being pressed against his forehead and the low, concerned murmur of All Might's voice. "There now, my boy. Just breathe. I am here," he groaned, his entire right side a universe of throbbing agony. He cracked his eyes open. The world was a blurry mess, but he could make out All Might's skeletal face leaning over him. His shattered arm had been crudely but effectively splintered with pieces of a broken spear shaft and strips of leather torn from an old saddle. What happened?" Izuku rasped, his throat dry. "You used 100% of One for All in a limb that was not prepared for 1%. All Might said grimly. He held up the hilt of Izuku's sword. It was all that was left. The rest had simply ceased to exist. "The power needs a proper vessel, young Midoriya. Your body is a glass cup, and you just tried to hold the entire ocean within it." The cup shattered. The pain was beginning to clear just enough for humiliation to set in. Tears of frustration and agony pricked at Izuku's eyes. "I failed. My first try, and I failed. I broke my arm and destroyed my only sword." "No," All Might said, his voice firm but kind. He helped Izuku sit up, propping him against the shield pile. "You did not fail. You learned. You learned the most important lesson of this quirk, respect. You now understand the raw, untamed nature of what you hold. This is a necessary step," he sighed, looking at Izuku's ruined arm with a pained expression. "But it also proves my point. Raw talent and heroic spirit are not enough. You need the right tools. Your body needs to become stronger, yes, we will work on that. But you also need a weapon and armor that can withstand the strain. A sacred quirk requires a sacred blade, or at least, something close to it." Izuku looked down at his splintered arm, despair creeping back in. "A blade like that would cost more than my whole town earns in a year. The royal forges, the elven smiths of the Silverwood, they don't make weapons for squires." "No, they don't," All Might agreed. "But we are not going to them. We are going to someone better. Someone more creative." He managed a small, mischievous smile. "We are going to see an artificer, a quirk forger. We are going to see Mei Hatsum." The name was vaguely familiar to Izuku. The Hatsum clan were renowned artisans, but not for swords or armor. They were famous for creating bizarre trinkets, self-propelling wagons, and other strange contraptions that blurred the line between magic and mechanics. They were seen as brilliant, but dangerously eccentric. "I hope you're not squeamish about heights," All Might said, helping Izuku to his feet. "Her forge is unconventional." The journey took them away from the town and into the craggy foothills of the nearest mountain range. There was no clear path, only a series of winding goat trails that All Might seemed to know by heart. After an hour of careful climbing, Izuku saw it, It wasn't a forge so much as a metallic tumor clinging to the sheer cliff face. A chaotic assemblage of stone, copper, and iron, it was pockmarked with windows of thick, greenish glass and bristled with strange antennae and weather vanes that spun and twitched in the mountain breeze. A massive water wheel, fed by a diverted waterfall, turned with a rhythmic groan, powering a series of grinding belts and bellows. The entire structure hummed with a manic energy, and every few minutes, a puff of colored smoke or a shower of sparks would erupt from one of its many chimneys. As they approached the heavy iron door, it was suddenly blown off its hinges by a contained but powerful explosion from within. It sailed over their heads and embedded itself in the mountainside 100 feet down the trail. From the now open doorway, a figure emerged, coughing away a cloud of pink smoke. It was a young woman, perhaps Izuku's age, with wild, salmon-pink hair tied into what could charitably be called dreadlocks. Her face was smudged with soot, and a pair of intricate, multi-lensed goggles were pushed up onto her forehead. Her amber eyes, magnified slightly by the lenses, were wide with a feverish, creative light. She was dressed in a stained leather apron over practical trousers and a tunic. "Well, Baby 237 is a bust," she announced to no one in particular, her voice fast and breathless. "The runic matrix for containing kinetic force is still unstable. But the data is fantastic. I just need to recalibrate the mana-to-material ratio and, oh." She finally noticed them, her wide eyes zeroing in on All Might. "Pops, you're looking extra bony today. Did you forget to eat again?" All Might sighed, a sound of long-suffering fondness. "May, my dear. How many times have I told you not to call me that, until you bring me better funding?" She shot back instantly, her gaze sweeping over to Izuku. Her eyes widened further, but not with recognition or sympathy. It was the look of a master craftsman seeing a fascinating, new problem. Her gaze fixed on Izuku's splinted arm. "Oh, what have we here? A catastrophic stress fracture. Multiple sites of failure. And is that residual magical energy I see? This isn't a simple break, is it? This is a quirk-induced systemic failure. How deliciously complex." Before Izuku could react, she was upon him. Her hands, surprisingly gentle but unnervingly swift, were all over his arm, her fingers probing the splint, her other hand making gestures in the air as if she were mentally disassembling him. "Fascinating! The bone density is average, muscle mass is low, you're a completely standard vessel. Whatever quirk did this must be monstrously powerful. A self-destructive quirk? Or a transfer that the body is rejecting? The applications for creating energy-dampening armor are immense. Tell me everything, May," All Might said, his voice cutting through her excited torrent of words. "This is young Izuku Midoriya. He is my successor." May froze for a second, her manic energy focusing into a beam of pure intensity. She looked from All Might's gaunt frame to Izuku's terrified face. Her amber eyes, powered by her own quirk, Zoom, which allowed her to see incredible distances or focus on microscopic details, seemed to analyze them on a molecular level. "One for all," she breathed, the words a statement, not a question. "So the old legend is true. A stockpiling quirk passed down through generations. The energy signature makes sense now, exponentially accumulating power in a vessel not designed for it. It's like trying to run a lightning storm through a copper wire. Of course it blew out." She stepped back, a grin spreading across her soot-stained face. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. "I love it! This is the greatest design challenge of my career. Forget funding, Pops, this is pro bono, for the art." She grabbed Izuku by his good arm and dragged him into the forge. The inside was even more chaotic than the exterior. Blueprints and schematics were plastered over every available surface. Half-finished contraptions, clockwork birds, steam-powered gauntlets, glowing crystals held in brass armatures, littered tables and shelves. The air was hot and smelled of hot metal, ozone, and strange alchemical reagents. In the center was a massive, roaring furnace, its heat so intense it warped the air around it. "Right," May declared, clapping her hands together. "The problem, a squishy, breakable boy needs to wield the power of a demigod without turning into a fine red mist. The solution, custom support gear. My babies will be your salvation." For the next several hours, Izuku was subjected to the most intense examination of his life. Mei measured every inch of him, took castings of his arm, and had him perform simple movements while she watched his posture with her zoom quirk, muttering about load-bearing joints and kinetic distribution. All the while, she maintained a running commentary. The sword is the easy part. A standard blade acts like a simple lever, focusing all the force on the wrist and elbow. That's why your arm turned to mush. No. We need a weapon that is also a conduit, a lightning rod. She began sketching furiously on a piece of parchment. We'll use a Damascan steel core for flexibility, folded 1,000 times with trace amounts of dragon bone dust to handle the magical resonance. The blade itself won't be what does the cutting. The power will. The sword is just to give it shape. She then turned her attention to his arm. But the blade is useless if the wielder disintegrates. The real baby here is the gauntlet. Her sketching became more frantic. This won't be simple armor. This will be a regulator. A framework of spring steel and dwarven alloys, designed to brace your entire arm from shoulder to fingertip. It will have reinforced channels, etched with dampening runes, to guide the flow of one for all. Think of it like an aqueduct for a flood. It won't stop the power, but it will give it a safe path to travel and distribute the physical shock across the entire structure, instead of letting your pathetic little bones take the full brunt of it. She looked up at Izuku, her eyes blazing with passion. It will be my masterpiece. A perfect fusion of mechanics and magic. It will allow you to wield this impossible power. For a little while, at least, at a very low output. Probably. We'll have to test it. She finished cheerfully, as Mei vanished into the back of her workshop, shouting about needing her number 7 crucible, and the last of her star iron ingots. All Might turned to a pale and overwhelmed Izuku. She is enthusiastic, the hero said with a weary sigh. But she is the best. While she works on the vessel for your body, we will work on the vessel of your mind. For the next 2 days, while the mountain forge rang with the sounds of hammering and the occasional small explosion, All Might took Izuku through a different kind of training. It was not about strength, but about control. Close your eyes, young Midoriya, All Might instructed. They sat in a quiet alcove near Mei's forge, the roar of the waterfall a constant backdrop. Do not try to draw on the power. Just feel it. Listen to it. One for all is more than just raw strength. It is a confluence of wills, a repository of the spirits of all who have wielded it before. They are a part of you now. You are not alone in this. Izuku did as he was told. He sat cross-legged, his broken arm resting in its sling, and focused inward. He found the ember, the sleeping titan, and instead of trying to command it, he simply observed. He let his consciousness drift towards it, not as a master, but as a visitor. The world faded away. The sound of the waterfall, the chill of the mountain air, the dull ache in his arm, it all receded into a distant hum. He found himself floating in a vast, dark, empty space. It was not cold or frightening, just void. Swirling around him were faint, ethereal wisps of the same greenish-gold energy that had crackled around his arm. It was the space inside the quirk. He was not alone. A figure began to coalesce from the swirling mists in front of him. It was a woman. She had dark hair that floated around her head as if she were underwater, and a kind, gentle smile. A single, dark beauty mark was prominent just below her lip. She wore the simple, practical garb of a knight from a bygone era. There was an aura of profound calm and gentle strength about her. She felt familiar. Like a forgotten memory or a dream he couldn't quite place. She floated towards him, her movements graceful and effortless. She did not speak with her mouth, but her voice echoed in his mind, clear and melodic. You try too hard, little one. Izuku stared, speechless. Who are you? He thought, the question forming in his mind. I am one of the embers that makes up this flame. I am a part of the legacy you now carry. Her smile widened. You see this power as a weapon to be held in your fist. A hammer to be swung. That is why it shatters you. She gestured to the void around them. You are trying to contain the storm. You must become the storm. You are trying to hold the ocean in a cup, when you should be letting the cup dissolve into the ocean. I don't understand. Izuku thought, his mind struggling to grasp the esoteric concepts. All Might said I need a stronger vessel. A strong vessel is important, she conceded, her voice patient. But a wise mind is essential. You focus the power on a single point, a single limb. It is a violent, clumsy act. It tears you apart. Do not hold the power. Let it hold you. Let it flow not just into your arm, but into every fiber of your being. From the tips of your toes to the crown of your head. Let it become your blood, your sinew, your second skin. She drifted closer, her spectral hand reaching out as if to touch his cheek. To master this power, you must first learn to float. The word resonated within him. Float. It wasn't about flying. It was about buoyancy. It was about letting go, about becoming one with the current instead of fighting it. It was a paradigm shift, a fundamental recontextualization of everything he thought he knew. The path is long, her voice said, beginning to fade as the vision started to dissolve. But you have a good heart. That is where all true strength begins. Do not forget that. Ninth, the world came rushing back. Izuku gasped, his eyes flying open. He was back in the mountain alcove, the roar of the waterfall filling his ears. All Might was watching him, a knowing look on his face. You saw one of them, didn't you? He asked softly. Izuku nodded, his mind still reeling. A woman. She had dark hair and a beauty mark. She told me to float. A deep, sorrowful nostalgia filled All Might's eyes. He looked up at the sky. Nana Shimura, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She was the seventh wielder of One for All. And she was my master. He looked back at Izuku, a new level of respect in his gaze. The vestiges have spoken to you. That is a rare and powerful sign. It means the quirk has truly accepted you. What she told you, that is the key, the secret to using One for All without destroying yourself. It is not about using 100% in a single finger. It is about letting a small percentage, 5% perhaps, flow through your entire body continuously. A state of constant, controlled power. A name for the concept bloomed in Izuku's mind, a perfect descriptor for the feeling Nana had tried to convey. Full cowl, Izuku whispered. All Might's eyes lit up. Yes. That's it exactly. Full cowl. Excellent. You have the theory, the path forward. As if on cue, a triumphant shout echoed from the forge. It is done. Behold, my beautiful babies. Mei Hatsum emerged, her face alight with manic glee. In her hands she carried his salvation. The sword was a masterpiece. Its blade was a soft, silvery gray, patterned with the faint, watery ripples of folded damascene steel. It was lighter than his old rust bucket, perfectly balanced, and it seemed to hum with a quiet energy. But the gauntlet was the true marvel. It was a sleek, articulated framework of dark, burnished metal and leather, designed to cover his entire right arm. It was not bulky, but lean and anatomical, with glowing green channels etched into the metal plates. It looked less like a piece of armor, and more like the skeletal limb of some futuristic golem. Baby 238, the verdant conduit blade, Mei announced, presenting the sword. And Baby 239, the full cowl regulator gauntlet. They are perfect. They will probably work. Maybe. Izuku took the sword in his left hand. The balance was exquisite. He then, with Mei's help, fitted the gauntlet onto his splintered right arm. It clicked and hissed as it locked into place, the articulated joints moving smoothly with his own. It felt right. He stood there, at the precipice of the mountain, a broken boy holding the tools of a hero. He had a weapon that could withstand the storm, a brace to keep his body from shattering, and a new understanding of how to float on the tides of his power. The weight of the sacred blade in his hand was immense, but for the first time, it was not the weight of despair. It was the weight of potential. The weight of a promise he now had the means to keep. The month leading up to the UA Nightly Order entrance trials was a crucible. For Izuku, it was a desperate race against time, a frantic montage of sweat, pain, and incremental progress. His life became a grueling routine orchestrated by the two most intense people he had ever met. By day, All Might put him through a training regimen so punishing it bordered on cruel. The scrapyard became his personal hell and his proving ground. Izuku hauled massive chunks of metal, ran obstacle courses through treacherous piles of junk, and performed endless sets of push-ups and squats until his muscles screamed for mercy. This wasn't just about building strength, All Might called it forging the vessel. His body had to become a container worthy of One for All, even with May's support gear. The gauntlet and sword remained wrapped in oilcloth, a constant, tantalizing promise of the power he was not yet ready to wield. By night, he would collapse in his small clearing, his body a single, unified ache. There, he would meditate, reaching into the void within. He sought the presence of Nana Shimura again, but she remained elusive. Instead, he focused on her words. Float. He would try to coax a tiny trickle of One for All from his core, not into a limb, but into his entire being. The first 50 times he tried, he felt nothing but a vague warmth. The 51st time, a faint greenish-gold energy flickered over his skin for a bare second before fizzling out, leaving him breathless and exhausted. But it was a start. He began to learn the feeling, the mental state required to let the power flow through him rather than from him. He named it full cow, a secret mantra whispered in the dark. It was the difference between a clenched fist and an open hand. On the final day before the trials, All Might stood before him, his arms crossed. Izuku, no longer quite so scrawny, his frame hardened with lean muscle, panted in the dust. It is time, young Midoriya, All Might said, his skeletal face grim. You have a flicker of control. You have a body that might, with luck, withstand a tiny fraction of the power. It is not enough, but it will have to do. He handed Izuku the wrapped bundles containing his new gear. The trials of the Order are not for the faint of heart. Do you understand what you are walking into? Izuku nodded, his expression resolute. I'm walking in as a quirkless squire with a secret. No one can know about One for All. I have to pass on my own merits, with a little help. He patted the gauntlet. Exactly, All Might affirmed. Your mind has always been your sharpest weapon. Today, it must be your shield as well. Good luck, my boy. Make me proud. The proving grounds of the Yue Knightly Order were a sight to behold. Carved into the foothills of Yue Mountain, the fortress itself looming above them like a silent god, the grounds were a sprawling complex of arenas, obstacle courses, and mock battlefields. The air thrummed with nervous energy and crackled with the open display of powerful quirks. Aspirants from every corner of the realm of Yue were gathered. There were nobles in polished, custom-made armor, their family crests proudly displayed. There were commoners with raw, untamed quirks, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. Izuku, in his simple leather tunic and carrying his new, unadorned gear, felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. He was a plain brown sparrow in a flock of peacocks. He saw Bakugo almost immediately. It was impossible to miss him. He stood with a cadre of other highborn aspirants, his posture radiating an arrogant confidence that was its own form of gravity, pulling others into his orbit. He was already wearing a prototype of his hero armor, black and orange plates designed for maximum mobility, his signature grenade-shaped gauntlets gleaming. He hadn't bothered with a sword. For him, it was a useless affectation. His quirk was his blade and his shield. Their eyes met across the crowded field. Bakugo's crimson gaze narrowed with contemptuous disbelief. You! Here? The look screamed. Izuku's heart stuttered, but he forced himself to hold the gaze for a brief second before looking away. He would not be intimidated. Not today. The aspirants were herded into a massive stone amphitheater. On a high dais stood the masters of the order. The most prominent was the Knight Commander, a surprisingly small, rodent-like creature with a prominent scar over one eye, known only as Principal Niza. His quirk, High Spec, was legendary. It was said he was more intelligent than any 10 men combined. Beside him were other masters, the stoic, bandaged figure of Shota Aizawa, the Erasure Knight, whose gaze could nullify quirks, the boisterous Present Mike, whose voice could shatter stone, and others, each a legend in their own right. Principal Niza stepped forward, his small voice magically amplified to fill the arena. Welcome, aspirants! Welcome to the Yue Knightly Order entrance trial. For generations, we have sought the best, the brightest, the strongest, and the most heroic to join our ranks. Today, you will be tested. Not just in strength, but in spirit. Not just in power, but in purpose. He paused, his beady eyes sweeping across the hundreds of hopeful faces. Your trials are threefold. The trial of steel, the trial of chivalry, and the trial of the beast. Succeed, and you will earn the right to call yourselves squires of Yui. Fail, and there is always next year. Let the trials begin. The first trial, the trial of steel, was a series of one-on-one duels in smaller arenas. Aspirants were matched randomly. The goal was not to injure, but to force a submission or push an opponent out of the marked ring. Blades were blunted, and mages were on standby to heal any accidental injuries. Izuku's first opponent was a burly young man whose quirk allowed him to turn his arms into solid rock. He was slow but immensely strong. Izuku, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm, drew the verdant conduit blade. It felt light and perfect in his hand. He didn't dare use full call yet. He had to rely on his mind. He dodged the boy's heavy, telegraphed swings, his smaller size making him a nimble target. He remembered his journal entries on fighting brute force quirks. Used their momentum against them. As the rock-armed boy charged, Izuku dropped low, sidestepped, and stuck out his leg. The boy, unable to stop his own momentum, tripped and went tumbling out of the ring. It was an anticlimactic, almost comical victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. His second match was against a girl with a tail, her movements agile and unpredictable. This time, he had to use his sword, parrying her quick strikes, his form precise and economical. He won by disarming her, his blade moving in a practiced, fluid motion he had drilled 1,000 times in his lonely clearing. He was winning, but he could feel the other aspirants watching him. The whispers started. Who is that? He moves well, but I don't see a quirk. Isn't that the quirkless kid from Mizudafu? He must have some subtle quirk. Enhancement, maybe? He was drawing attention, and not the good kind. It was the attention of curiosity bordering on suspicion. Then, for his final duel, the name was called, and Izuku's blood ran cold. In Arena Gamma, Izuku Midoriya vs. Tenya Ida. A tall, powerfully built young man with sharp, rectangular glasses strode into the arena. He was clad in magnificent, full-plate armor of silver and blue, intricately designed. But it was his legs that drew the eye. From the back of his greaves protruded a series of complex, metallic exhaust pipes. This was Tenya Ida, youngest son of the legendary Ida family, a lineage of knights famous for their speed. Greetings, opponent! Ida boomed, his voice formal and loud. He chopped the air with his hand in a stiff, precise gesture. I am Tenya Ida, of the Ida clan. It is an honor to face you. I shall endeavor to make this a swift and honorable contest, befitting the standards of the Yui order. Izuku swallowed hard. I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's an honor to face you too. The proctor signaled the start of the match. Ida immediately crouched, the pipes on his legs beginning to hiss and glow with a blue light. Recipro burst. He shot forward, not as a man running, but as a bolt fired from a crossbow. He was a silver-blue blur, crossing the 20-foot arena in the blink of an eye. Izuku's mind, honed by months of analyzing Bakugo, reacted on pure instinct. Too fast to block, too direct to parry. He didn't try to meet the attack. He just fell. He dropped to the ground, and Ida's armored form shot over him, the wind of his passage ruffling Izuku's hair. Ida, a master of linear speed, was not as adept at sudden stops. He overshot his target, skidding to a halt at the edge of the ring. A surprising but effective evasive maneuver, Ida declared, turning around. However, you cannot spend the whole match on the floor. Izuku scrambled to his feet. He knew he couldn't win a direct confrontation. Ida was too strong, too fast, and his armor was too thick. Izuku had only one advantage, his analytical mind and a power no one could see. I need to use it. Just a little. He took a deep breath, and as Ida prepared for another charge, Izuku reached inside himself. Float. He called upon the tiniest fraction of power, letting it suffuse his entire body. One for all, full call 2%. It was barely anything, but the world sharpened. The colors seemed brighter, the sounds clearer. He could feel the thrum of energy in his muscles, a low, pleasant hum. Green sparks, so faint they were almost invisible in the bright sun, danced around him for a bare second. Ida charged again. This time, Izuku didn't just see a blur. He could perceive the movement, track the trajectory. It was still incredibly fast, but it was no longer incomprehensible. He sidestepped, his body moving with a speed and grace that was not his own, and as Ida passed, Izuku swung his sword. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the weakness he'd spotted in the first pass. He struck the back of Ida's knee joint, an unarmored spot where the plates met. The blunted sword struck with a solid clang. It wasn't a damaging blow, but it was enough to buckle Ida's leg. The knight's perfect form broke, and he stumbled, his incredible momentum sending him sprawling. Izuku was on him in an instant, the tip of his blade at Ida's throat. Ida lay on the ground, stunned. He had been so certain of his victory. He looked up at Izuku, who was panting slightly, the faint green aura already gone. I yield, Ida said, his voice filled with disbelief. Your speed, it came out of nowhere. A remarkable activation of your quirk, sir. Izuku offered a hand and helped him up. You were incredible, Izuku said honestly. If you'd hit me, I'd have been done for. Ida, ever the sportsman, shook his hand firmly. A victory well earned. You have my respect, Izuku Midoriya. He seemed to have no suspicion, simply accepting Izuku's sudden burst of speed as the nature of his unknown quirk. From the stands, Bakugo watched, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He had seen it. A flicker of green light. A sudden, impossible burst of speed. This wasn't the useless, quirkless Deku he knew. Something had changed. And he was going to find out what. The second trial, the trial of chivalry, was a test of character. The aspirants were presented with a series of complex scenarios acted out by UA masters in disguise. They had to navigate situations requiring diplomacy, empathy, and quick thinking. One scenario involved a merchant, played by the master present Mike in a ridiculously large hat, whose cart had broken, spilling valuable but fragile potions, actually colored water, all over a busy road. Many aspirants simply used their quirks to clear the road, shattering the bottles. Others ignored the merchant entirely, deeming it beneath a knight's notice. Bakugo simply blasted a path through the mess, roaring for the old man to get out of his way. Izuku approached cautiously. He helped the frantic merchant gather the unbroken bottles, used his own tunic to gently wrap them, and then spent 10 minutes analyzing the broken axle of the cart. He couldn't fix it, but he was able to diagnose the problem and suggest a way to brace it for a short trip to the nearest wheelwright. Present Mike, dropping his act for a moment, gave him a subtle but approving nod. The final scenario was the most difficult. An old woman, the small, elderly healing master, recovery girl, was being harassed by a pair of thugs, 2 senior UA squires. The thugs were goading the aspirants, trying to provoke a fight. Look at this lot, one thug sneered. A bunch of preening nobles and jumped-up commoners who think a fancy quirk makes them a hero. Many aspirants rose to the bait, immediately challenging the thugs to a duel, escalating the situation. Ida tried to lecture them on the knightly code of conduct, which only earned him more mockery. Izuku watched, his brow furrowed. He saw what the others missed. The old woman wasn't scared. She was watching the aspirants, her gaze sharp and assessing. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a test of perception. He walked forward, deliberately placing himself between the thugs and the old woman, but he didn't draw his sword. Sirs, he said, his voice calm and steady. You've made your point. You're clearly skilled warriors to be so confident. But this woman has done you no harm. Surely there are more worthy opponents for men of your caliber than an unarmed woman and a bunch of untried aspirants. He was defusing the situation with flattery, appealing to their ego rather than confronting it. The thugs seemed taken aback. What's it to you, pipsqueak? One of them grumbled, though with less conviction. Nothing, Izuku said with a small, disarming smile. I just think it would be a shame for your reputations if word got around that you waste your time bullying the elderly. Before the thugs could respond, the old woman spoke, her voice surprisingly strong. That's enough, boys. This one has a good head on his shoulders. The 2 squires immediately bowed to her. The test was over. As he walked away, Izuku felt a pair of eyes on him. He turned to see a girl with a round, cheerful face and warm brown eyes. She had been in the group watching the scenario. She gave him a bright, genuine smile. That was really smart, she said. I was about to float them into the air until they apologized. She wiggled her fingers, and a nearby pebble lifted off the ground, suddenly weightless. I'm Achiko Uraraka, she said, offering a hand. It's nice to meet you, Izuku Midoriya, he replied, shaking her hand. It was the first time an aspirant had approached him with genuine friendliness. Your quirk is zero gravity? That's amazing. It's good for lifting things, but it makes me kind of nauseous if I overuse it, she admitted with a laugh. You did great in the duels too. You and that Ida fellow were incredible. Before they could talk more, the horns blew, signaling the end of the second trial and the start of the third and final test. For the trial of the beast, all the remaining aspirants were led into a vast, walled-off section of the proving grounds designed to look like a ruined city. Crumbling towers, collapsed walls, and debris-strewn streets created a complex, urban battlefield. Principal Nisa's amplified voice echoed from the fortress walls. Welcome to your final trial. In this city, we have hidden a beast. A captured creature of considerable power. Your objective is not to slay it, but to subdue and capture it. You will be working in teams, assigned as you enter. A knight who cannot work with his comrades is no knight at all. Your performance will be judged on teamwork, strategic thinking, and heroism. Begin. The massive gates creaked open. As Izuku entered, a proctor handed him a token with a team designation. He looked around and saw Ida, polishing his glasses with a cloth, and Uraraka, bouncing on her toes with nervous energy, holding matching tokens. Fate, it seemed, had put them together. Midoriya! Uraraka! It seems we are comrades in this endeavor, Ida announced, striding over. Excellent! A team composed of strategy, versatility, and he looked at Izuku. Unexpected speed, a formidable combination. Let's do our best. Uraraka chirped, giving them both a determined thumbs up. Izuku felt a surge of warmth. For the first time, he wasn't alone. He had allies. He had a team. They moved into the ruined city, Ida's armored boots crunching on the gravel. A sound strategy is paramount, Ida began. We must ascertain the nature of the beast before engaging. Reconnaissance should be our first priority. I can get a good view from up high, Uraraka offered, pointing to a crumbling clock tower. I can make myself light and climb up easily. A fine plan, Uraraka, Ida approved. Midoriya and I will scout at ground level. We will rendezvous here in 10 minutes. Uraraka gave them a wave and scurried off towards the tower. Izuku and Ida began to cautiously navigate the rubble-strewn streets. It was Ida who saw it first. He pointed towards a massive shape slumped in the center of the city's main plaza. By the founders, Ida breathed. It was a beast larger than any Izuku had ever seen outside of a storybook. It resembled a gigantic golem, but made of rock, steel, and what looked like pieces of the ruined city itself. It was easily 50 feet tall, a lumbering behemoth of scrap metal and masonry, held together by some unknown force. It was currently dormant, its single, large optical sensor dark. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the plaza. Bakugo, propelled by his quirk, came screaming in from above. Found it first, you losers! He roared, unleashing a massive howitzer impact directly at the golem's head. The explosion was spectacular, but it did little more than char the golem's metal face and knock a few rocks loose. The golem's single red eye flared to life. It rose to its full, towering height and let out a deafening groan of grinding metal and stone. The trial of the beast had begun, and Katsuki Bakugo had just woken it up and made it very, very angry. The golem's massive stone fist swung, and Bakugo, with his incredible reflexes, blasted himself out of the way just in time. The fist slammed into the ground where he had been, shattering the flagstones and sending a shockwave that Izuku and Ida could feel from 100 yards away. Aspirants began to converge on the plaza, their teamwork dissolving into a chaotic free-for-all. A boy who could shoot lasers from his navel peppered the golem's leg to no effect. A girl with vine-like hair tried to ensnare its feet, but the vines snapped under its immense weight. It was a scene of utter chaos. This is a disaster, Ida exclaimed. There is no coordination. Everyone is simply attacking wildly. Just then, Uraraka came running up to them, her face pale. Guys! I saw it from the tower! The golem is slow, but it's incredibly strong. And there's something else. There are civilians trapped in the ruins. Izuku's head snapped up. Civilians? But this is a trial. They must be part of the test. Uraraka said frantically. I saw a group of them, actors maybe, huddled in a building right in the golem's path. It's going to collapse if that thing takes one more step in that direction. This changed everything. It wasn't just about subduing the beast anymore. It was about saving people. This was the real test of heroism. Izuku's mind went into overdrive, the world slowing down as he analyzed the situation with the same cold clarity he'd felt when he faced the Noma. The golem was too big to fight head-on. Distracting it was key. Rescuing the trapped civilians was the priority. I have a plan, Izuku said, his voice sharp and confident, cutting through the chaos. Ida and Uraraka turned to him, surprised by his sudden authority. Uraraka, your quirk is our best asset. Can you make something really heavy float? Yes. But the heavier it is, the more it drains me, she said. Ida, your speed is our only hope for a quick rescue. How fast can you move people out of danger? My recipro burst is best for personal speed, but I can carry one person at a time with only a minor reduction in velocity. Ida reported, chopping the air. Okay, Izuku said, pointing. Uraraka, see that massive slab of collapsed wall over there? I need you to make it weightless. Ida, you're on rescue duty. Get those people out of that building, now! What will you do, Midoriya? Ida asked, his expression serious. Izuku looked at the lumbering golem, which was now swatting away aspirants like flies. He looked at his gauntlet hand. He had to draw its attention. He had to buy them time. I'm going to be the bait, he said. He took a deep breath. Float. He activated full cowl, pushing it to 5%. The green lightning, more pronounced this time, crackled around him. The world snapped into high-definition focus. He could feel the power singing in his veins, a controlled burn that felt incredible. Let's go! He yelled. The team sprang into action. Ida's engines roared to life as he shot off towards the trapped civilians. Uraraka ran to the massive piece of rubble, pressing her hands against it, her face straining with concentration. Izuku, a blur of green energy, ran directly into the plaza. Hey! Ugly! He screamed, his voice amplified by the power coursing through him. Over here! He ran straight towards the golem, using his newfound speed to dodge a clumsy stomp that cracked the ground. He leaped onto a pile of rubble, making himself a clear target. The golem's single red eye locked onto this new, fast-moving annoyance. It turned its immense body, its attention completely diverted from the building where Ida was now pulling people from the wreckage. Bakugo, hovering nearby, watched in stunned disbelief. He saw the green lightning. He saw Deku, useless, quirkless, pathetic Deku, moving with impossible speed, single-handedly drawing the attention of a monster that had shrugged off his own strongest attacks. The rage and confusion in his chest felt like it was going to choke him. Izuku's plan was working. The golem was focused entirely on him. He leaped from ruin to ruin, a frantic grasshopper leading a giant on a merry chase. But it was taking a toll. 5% of a god's power was still an immense strain. His muscles were burning, his lungs felt raw. He risked a glance back. Ida had rescued the last civilian. Uraraka was staggering back from the huge slab of wall, which was now hovering eerily a few inches off the ground. She gave him a shaky thumbs up. It was time for the final phase. Now! Izuku screamed. He changed direction, running straight for the hovering slab. The golem, its slow intelligence finally processing the new target, lumbered after him. Uraraka, seeing his signal, put her hands together. Release! She yelled, her face pale. The spell was broken. The massive, multi-ton slab of concrete and rebar crashed down with the force of a meteor, directly in the golem's path. It was a perfect trap. The golem, unable to stop its forward momentum, stumbled over the new obstacle. It teetered, its own immense weight becoming its downfall. With a deafening groan, it fell forward, crashing face first into the plaza. It tried to push itself up, but its fall had damaged its internal mechanics. It twitched, its red eye flickered, and then it went dark. Silence fell over the ruined city. The aspirants, who had been scattered and defeated, stared in awe. The trio of newcomers, the fast knight, the floating girl, and the green lightning squire, had done what none of them could. They had subdued the beast not with brute force, but with perfect teamwork and strategy. Izuku's full cowl sputtered out. The power vanished, and a wave of exhaustion so profound it was dizzying washed over him. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to his knees, panting, his body screaming in protest. Uraraka and Ida rushed to his side. "Midoriya, you were magnificent!" Ida declared, for once too impressed for his usual hand-chopping. "That was amazing, Deku!" Uraraka cheered, her earlier nausea forgotten in the rush of victory. The nickname, which had always been an insult, sounded different from her. It sounded friendly. Like a hero name. He looked up at his new friends, a genuine smile spreading across his tired face. From a distance, Bakugo watched them, his expression unreadable, a storm of rage, jealousy, and a new, unsettling emotion he couldn't name, a tiny, grudging flicker of respect. Later, as the sun began to set, the aspirants gathered one last time in the grand amphitheater. Principal Niza stood on the dais, a list in his small paws. "The trials are concluded," he announced. "We have seen displays of great power, and displays of great foolishness. But we have also seen moments of true heroism." His eyes seemed to find Izuku, Uraraka, and Ida in the crowd. "The list of those who have been accepted into the Yue Knightly Order as squires is now posted. Find your name, and your new life begins." With a frantic surge of motion, everyone rushed to the large parchment boards that had been erected. Izuku's heart was in his throat. He scanned the list, his eyes darting over names. He saw Tenya Ida. He saw Ochiko Uraraka. He saw Katsuki Bakugo. His eyes continued down the long list, a cold dread beginning to seep into him. Had he failed? Had his performance not been enough? And then he saw it. Near the bottom, but undeniably there, Izuku Midoriya. The world seemed to fall away. He had done it. He had actually done it. The quirkless boy, the useless Deku, was now a squire of the Yue Knightly Order. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Ida giving him a firm, approving nod. Uraraka bounced up beside him, her smile as bright as the sun. He had passed. He was accepted. But as he looked up at the towering spires of the fortress, he saw the long shadow it cast over the proving grounds. His suspicion had been right. This was not an ending. His true trial, the one against the rising darkness of the Sorcerer King, had only just begun.